Good morning, everyone. Real honor to be here to open this training session. Thanks for your attendance and your attention to this really important matter. It's been 3 years since we started having serious discussions at this university around what it means to create an inclusive environment. And we have a long way to go, there's no doubt about it. We do well in some areas, we're working hard in others. One area that I think we need to do so much better in is creating an inclusive and diverse faculty body. We got one person on our side here. The new strategic plan for the university calls for creating an inclusive spirit by all of our community members. And again, like I say, if we look at our student body, we're doing well. Let's be honest, we're not good in our faculty ranks. We just are not. The numbers bear that out. Now, do we look much different than a lot of our peer institutions? No. But that still isn't good enough for what we're trying to accomplish as a university. And so let's do that hard work. It's the right thing to do. And I know so many of you are dedicated to that effort. And we are so appreciative of all that you are doing. Like I said, about 3 years ago, we really started to work with the Academic Senate. This became a very strong point of what we're the way to move forward. We've put a lot of things in place. I know a lot of the schools are putting together 5-year strategic plans that include issues around faculty hiring. We also must pay attention to not only hiring, right, but the climate and while diverse faculty are here on campus, and then figuring out why we lose diverse faculty to other places and see what we can do about that. So there's a lot of different pieces to this, I'm aware, and we're not going to solve this all in one day. But let's continue to pay attention to it. And I'm very proud of the faculty, because all of this really came from the faculty around how we get better in these areas. We put a lot of resources over the past number of years to continue to build an inclusive environment for our faculty. I'll be announcing this fall some new resources aimed at diversifying our faculty and creating a more inclusive and equitable environment for our faculty. In concert with the deans, we will create a large fund for the recruitment of faculty who help us become a more diverse faculty body. That's on the way, along with some other things that I want to do, such as creating a center for diversity and inclusion, modeled on some of the work we're doing around, for example, our Center for Excellence in Teaching, our Center for Excellence in Research. Let's have one around a Center for Excellence in Diversity and Inclusion, so I'll be announcing that. So there's a lot going on at the university, and I think it's something the university should be very proud of, the amount of energy that we have put toward this. And again, like Elizabeth said, I'm very appreciative of you being here and tackling these issues head on, and thinking about what we can all do to make a more diverse and inclusive environment. One of the areas we have made some strides in is creating and bringing a group of faculty and staff and students to the university, and that is our Race and Equity Center. And they're now in Dauterive Hall. The Race and Equity Center is creating a national campus climate survey, which I'm proud that USC will be sort of the launching point of that. And they're doing a lot of work around what it takes to create an inclusive environment on university campuses. And the head of that is Professor Sean Harper. He's joint appointed in the School of Education and the School of Business. And I'm very appreciative that he has the time today to lead this very important training session around implicit bias, faculty hiring, and the like. And I said hello to him, so I know he's out there somewhere. And it's my pleasure to bring him up now. Sean, where are you? Oh, there he is.
Thanks so much, Michael. I think you set the perfect context for our time together here today. Hello, colleagues. Hello. Good morning. It is really wonderful to see you. I consider it an honor and a privilege to spend a couple hours talking with you. I am not going to do the stereotypical professorial thing and talk at you for 2 hours. There will be lots of opportunities for engagement and collective sense-making in our time here today as we talk about moving from bias to intentionality. And I would add a few more words to that: strategy and ambition and leadership in faculty searches around equity, diversity, and inclusion. I think that it is a real testament to our provost that we are all here today, and certainly Vice Provost Elizabeth Grady. I thank you both for creating this space for us to learn together as colleagues as we endeavor to become a more diverse and inclusive university. Michael mentioned that I lead the USC Race and Equity Center. We are indeed right next door in Dotrieve Hall. So throughout our time here today, you will hear me frequently say we, us, our. I realize that there's just one of me here at the podium. But when I talk about we, us, and our, I really am talking about the collective work that we do at the center. Foremost, we are researchers. We do research around equity, diversity, and inclusion all across the country. So, it really is a treat for us to be able to bring what we take to colleges and universities elsewhere here to USC to help transform our environment to a compositionally and, more inclusive place. I would be remiss if I didn't say, in addition to the 18 wonderful people that are on our team in the center, we also have 107 faculty affiliates. These are professors here at USC across each of our academic schools across the campus who study race, people of color, immigration, racial equity, racial inequities, and so on. Our center convenes and brings together those 107 experts. So it's not just the 18 of us, but we really are joined by colleagues who have lots of expertise right here on your faculties, in your departments. So that's a treat for us. And lastly, we developed a thing that we called the Penn Equity Institutes when our center was at the University of Pennsylvania. We've since renamed them the USC Equity Institutes. And these are 8-week professional learning experiences for college presidents, provosts, deans, and department chairs that we offer all across the country. We have 59 Equity Institute faculty members. These are folks who themselves are college presidents, deans, and provosts, and tenured faculty members who are real experts on equity, diversity, and inclusion. They teach for us. So, it's just a real treat to do this work and to share some of the insights from that work with you during our time here this morning. I did mention that foremost, we are researchers in our center. In fact, as it turns out, we are in 10 days releasing a report about Black students at public colleges and universities. It is a 50-state report card in which we grade every single public college and university in each of the 50 states on 4 equity indicators. I have to say that it is a relief that ours is private, not public, because one of those equity indicators in the report on which we grade institutions is around the ratio of Black students to Black faculty. Were we public, the University of Southern California, unfortunately, and it would break my heart to have to award us an F. I put us just for fun in preparation for our time here today. I put us in the formula that we use to grade the public institutions, and we would definitely be near the very, very, very bottom when it comes to the inequity between student representation and the composition of the faculty. Let's talk a bit more beyond, say, black students. As Michael mentioned, ours is a remarkably diverse undergraduate student body, one of the best in the country. Right? Like if I were grading institutions on undergraduate student composition, we would get an A++. It's one of the things that makes me most proud about being a professor here at this university. It is compositionally quite diverse. Our argument in the center, in our work with institutional leaders and with faculty members, is that students, particularly students of color, deserve to be taught by a more diverse faculty. I would also argue, as I have done elsewhere in my work, that white students deserve to be taught by a more diverse array of faculty members. I'm going to get into that a bit more and unpack those stances a bit. But let me just say that this is where we are compositionally. In fact, I think we're even more diverse now. Like these are 2 years ago data, which are the most recently available federal data. I pulled these from the federal government. But only 39% of our students were white 2 years ago. Let's contrast that with our faculty composition. In fact, let's start at the bottom and work our ways up. Our faculty is perhaps nearly twice as white as our undergraduate student composition, right? And then I broke out the numbers by rank for faculty of color at the top. And you will see that especially among the tenured and tenure track faculty, that we have a pathetically low, embarrassingly low number of Black and Latinx faculty. I also want to offer a disclaimer about Asian American and Pacific Islander faculty. While those numbers may appear to be high, it depends on where they are, right? There are some schools on our campus that actually don't have many Asian American and Pacific Islander faculty. For instance, the Rasier School of Education, my primary academic home, has one Asian American tenure track faculty member. So, when we look at numbers in the aggregate, those kinds of realities are often masked. What I also want to say about these numbers is that they're not broken out by school. There are lots of schools on our campus that have no Black or Latino faculty on its tenure track, and very few among its RTPC faculty. I want us to be better. I want us to look different. I want us to look more like the students that we admit and teach here. Let's do, for fun, some collective sense-making. So I'm going to, for a moment here, invite 3 responses to 3 questions. And we'll do them one at a time. Yes? 7,400 for everyone. Great question. Do we have mics somewhere, by the way? Okay, good. We might need to have someone run a mic. Let's see how this goes. So as we look at these numbers, I'm going to invite some collective sense-making here. So my first question for us is, how did we get here? Given the composition of our current faculty here at USC, how did we get here?
I think that when you look over time, there is a pipeline issue that oftentimes takes a long time for people to get in the pipeline. I speak as a woman who hit the job market with almost no women in academia, certainly in my area. It just takes a long time to get into that pipeline and to get assistant professors. It took me 10 years to get promoted into finally getting tenure because I had to move around a lot. So yeah, it takes a long time to change these patterns.
Okay. The first explanation here, which is a good one, it's a fair one, that there's a pipeline shortage of faculty of color, and it takes time to grow that pipeline. Great. Two more perspectives on this first question.
Timothy Kingston, the Georgia School of Engineering. I would say lack of attention and accountability.
Okay.
Because other of our peer institutions perhaps may be doing much better than we are, and they're able to do, after looking into this and putting attention to it and being accountable, they're doing much better than we are.
Okay, lack of attention and accountability. Timothy, do you think, you've been here a while, do you think that lack of attention has been deliberate, or has it just been perhaps accidental negligence in your view?
I think accidental negligence.
Okay, all right. I think we have one more here. Sorry.
Take anybody's spot. Kira Lippett, I'm in the School of Cinematic Arts, also in East Asian Language and Cultures and Comprehension. I just want to reinforce what Timothy just said, but I'm going to put it in another phrasing, because I've been here for almost 15 years, and we periodically get told we got to do better, you know, in terms of faculty recruiting and retention and so forth. But I also want to just put on the table, university has to do better. University has to do better at the top. And today's forum is a good forum in the beginning. But I think this university has, over the past 15 years, sent so many mixed messages out into the larger academic community. And it's right that the faculty have to take responsibility, and we have to be accountable for the hiring practice and retention practices. I would ask that the university think about the kind of messages that it has sent around some certain high-profile tenure denial cases, non-retention, so forth, that have occurred over the past 15 years or so. I would like that to be part of our discussion.
Without naming names, could you give us perhaps a helpful example of the mixed messages from the higher levels?
Without naming names, there was a stretch in which this university's reputation, and this was about 10 years ago, was that it was not tenuring Asian American in particular and women faculty members. And there were a string of tenure denials that became very public, and I know it affected things like recruiting at certain levels in certain departments. So I think there are things that we need to do as faculty and we need to do as hiring bodies, and there are things that schools need to do in terms of retention. We also want the university taking it. I do think the university is making those strides right now, but I think it has to be part of the discussion of how we got to this.
Might there be some perhaps cultural residue from that period, say a decade ago? Because I would imagine that someone here is thinking, well, that was 10 years ago, right? But could it be that there are some residual effects of what happened during that period?
I think, you know, not only during that period, I mean, USC has undergone a massive transformation in terms of its reputation and its place as an institution within the larger academic community. So I think it's not just 10 years ago, but it's part of a much deeper and longer process that got us here, and it's going to take just the same amount of effort to kind of turn this around.
Great. Fantastic. Actually, perfect segue to my next question here for our collective consideration. Why are we still here? I can understand perhaps if these were our demographics 20 years ago or even a decade ago, right? But in 2018, why are we still here? Why don't we look more like our student body, and as Timothy said, more like our peer institutions when it comes to faculty composition? I see two hands here, and then a third here.
One of the problems is even if a tenure track faculty is hired who is minority African American, for example, as in the School of Architecture. I'm Diane Guerrero from the School of Architecture. Once the faculty is hired, then the problems become overloading that person with administrative responsibilities. In the architecture school, it's year coordinators, things like that. Lack of mentoring of senior white male faculty, because the design faculty is almost entirely white male. No mentoring of the junior faculty, African American. a whole series of things like this, that once the person is hired, they don't get the kind of help. And I don't mean help in sort of a negative way, I mean encouragement, mentoring, and so forth, that makes it possible for them to succeed, even though we have some things on the books that make it look as if we give some time off, we give release from certain things, we give extra money for research, but we're not careful about enabling them to use their time effectively to get where they need to get tenure.
Fantastic. Very, very, very good. Thank you. Spoiler alert. At the very end of our 2 hours here together, my 2 hours with you, I am going to talk about climate and how we can't just put our emphasis on recruiting a diverse faculty, but we have to pay attention to many of the issues that you just eloquently put on the table around retaining and supporting and advancing them. Excellent.
I'm Daria Roithmeyer from the law school. I think we're still here because hiring reproduces itself. So to the extent that you have predominantly white faculty doing the hiring, their social networks tend to be predominantly white. They select those who most look like them, and then in terms of retention, those who are funneled out through tenure denial or counseled out are more likely to be different than those who were doing the hiring or doing the selecting in the first place. So networks and the self-reinforcing dynamics of those kinds of networks and the hiring process itself helps to explain why we're still here.
Fabulous. I'm going to touch on each of those factors. I'm glad that you just named them because as I was putting this together, I deliberately chose to not spend a ton of time there. I will explain why when we get there, but I think that your explanation is spot on. So thanks for that. Okay, last one here. Or here.
Cohen, Dean of the Gerontology School. I think the number one reason we fail to compete with other institutions for all faculty is the high cost of living in Los Angeles. I think that many recruitments fail because of that. And I think realistically, it's very likely that minority candidates are more affected by that. They're less likely to have personal wealth and choose other competing offers.
Do we have,
less expensive places.
do you know if we have data to confirm that?
I don't have data, just personal experience. It's really tough to move to Los Angeles from the Midwest.
You know, my experience with this is that in our work with faculty of color across the country, many of them tell us that they much rather live in a place that is culturally, ethnically, linguistically diverse. They'd rather not live, for instance, I went to graduate school in Bloomington, Indiana. That is not an attractive place to be a professor for many people of color. Los Angeles, by contrast, I think would be much more attractive. So I'm not sure. I mean, maybe. I'm just not sure. Certainly, Columbia University and New York University have experienced more success than have we in diversifying their faculties. And you know, certainly the cost of living in New York City is extraordinary as well. So yeah, okay. So maybe one more question here for our collective consideration. Where do we want to be as a university? Do we want to stay here, or do we want to be something else? What is it that we want to be when it comes to the composition of our faculty? Larissa? I knew you weren't going to.
I know, right? Since you have that slide, I think to challenge everybody, and hopefully you will also help us, why is our RTPC and tenure faculty look so different? You know, when we make these arguments, clearly we can hire RTPC. Clearly they can live in LA and they can afford the cost of living. I mean, there's a huge discrepancy in these two groups that we need as an institution to really question where we have put our efforts, our intentions, and that we are capable of recruiting faculty that are diverse. but maybe we're not allocating them all in the same proportion.
Can you do some theorizing?
Can I do some theorizing? Well, I'm not a researcher in this area, which is why I'm looking for your guidance, but I do think that culturally, we still consider tenure and tenure track as the elite of academia. And we are selecting our faculty and recruiting our faculty. What I mean selecting, I understand the pipeline issues, but I think we're not intentionally seeking and mentoring and sponsoring our academics of color to seek those positions and to recruit them into those positions. And inevitably, qualified people might be ending up in a different path, and that's what the institution can do and can change, and load them to teach. So they become teachers, and our researchers look very different.
Yeah, these are fantastic, yet very troubling explanations here. Our next report, after the Black Student Report Card, is going to be, and we're releasing this in about a month. It's an analysis of racial and gender stratification at leading public and private colleges and universities. USC will be a part of that analysis. And in it, Larissa, we use U.S. Department of Education data that the institutions report to make painfully clear that actually many leading universities are, in fact, racially and ethnically diverse. It just so happens, though, that the people of color are disproportionately and overwhelmingly in positions that are not located near the power epicenter of an institution. Say in food services and groundskeeping and custodial roles. Those are all important roles and the people who do that work are absolutely deserving of respect for the work they do. But the point that we make in our analysis is that when we look at tenured faculty and we look at the composition of the provost office and executive leadership teams and the president's office, those tend to be overwhelmingly, sometimes entirely white. I think that same sort of stratification plays itself out in the various types of faculty that we have here at USC. Two more. Lavana?
I'm Lavana Lewis from the Price School. And in answering the question, where do we want to be? We want to be a place where every student and every faculty member has to experience the discomfort of being the only one in the room. That people recognize the power of those different voices and to acknowledge those voices without judgment and baggage.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. It's on.
It's on. I've thought about this issue a lot, and in my own experience, what I've observed is that oftentimes when we bring in individuals of color in a tenure track kind of position, or in a tenure track position, and they get hired, oftentimes they have excellent ideas, they have excellent papers, but oftentimes they don't have a lot of them. Okay, so what this means is that the numbers game is a couple of cases I can think of, and they both involved individuals of color who did not get tenure. One most recently, very brilliant ideas. It's probably the best record of ideas I have seen in 20 years from a candidate in many different fields, but the numbers weren't there. This person did not get tenure. And it's a crime. I mean, so if we had a system where we were looking at the excellence of the ideas in so many papers, then I think we would be in a position to grapple with some of these issues of perhaps you don't have as many papers because you didn't have as much of a support system all the way along the line, so that when you get up to tenure, you don't have the numbers. But if you have the ideas, you should be tenurable.
You know, I was going to address this when we got to the climate part, but I'll talk about it now. There is a very robust body of literature around faculty diversity. Folks like Caroline Turner and Daryl Smith, whom we hosted here last spring, they've done extraordinary work. Christine Stanley is another person. Their work makes very clear that the sort of differences in production in terms of numbers have very little, in fact, nothing at all to do with ability or motivation. Instead, it is the disproportionate workload that faculty of color have to take on when they're the only one. I've been the only one many times. The whole 10 years that I was at Penn, I was the only faculty person of color in my department. When that happens, you're the token person that they need to put in all the brochures and all the commercials that they want to put in front of all of the students of color who need support in, same race mentoring and protection and advocacy and so on. Certainly, even in professional associations, as editorial boards aspire to be compositionally different, yeah, they keep going to the same few, faculty of color, and it creates a disproportionate workload. I just wrote 4 days ago my 91st tenure and promotion review letter. 91, right? And it's because there are so few of us in my field who are full professors that I disproportionately get dumped on. So what does it mean when I have to write 91 tenure letters? It then means that I can't write 91 peer-reviewed journal articles as a result of that. So I think that's something that I want us to keep in mind as we think about how we treat the colleagues whom we invite to be part of our academic community here. It is extremely important to not dump on them. This disproportionate amount of work is what we Black academics call the Black tax, right? Okay, good. All right, so I promised you that we would only do 3 of these. This is actually not a question. How we get there. So throughout the remainder of our time here, I'm going to talk about how do we get to the place where we want to be as a demographically more diverse and inclusive place. So I have lots of ideas that I will share from our research. One of the things that I want to start us with, though, Michael mentioned that our center does campus climate studies. Sometimes our climate studies are focused on how students experience the racial climate, but other times they're focused on how faculty members and faculty and staff and administrators experience the climate. Sometimes in the latter, oftentimes actually, we hear the darndest things. People have the most outrageous stories to share with us of things that their colleagues have said and done that, are just absolutely mind-blowing. I bet that if I brought a handful of those here to share with you today, there'd be collective gasp. And you would laugh, perhaps, and you would be like, oh, my God, that's outrageous. These kinds of things that happen on other campuses. I did not do that. I didn't bring those examples because sometimes they are counterproductive. They have us, sort of make sense of what's happening at some other place. Throughout our time here today, we're going to make sense of what happens at this place. I think that's going to be most useful for us. So what I would like us to do now, at our roundtables, I'm going to give you, maybe 10 minutes. If you could talk with your colleagues at your roundtable about the most outrageous thing a faculty colleague has said or done during a faculty search process, I think that might help us get some local examples that I think would be, frankly, much more useful to you than examples that I have from Princeton and Cornell and other places. So let's take about 10 minutes. You all talk with each other at your roundtables about the most outrageous thing that someone's said or done. And I'm going to ask you all, a few of you, to share some of those outrageous examples. Okay. Might three people have compelling examples of outrageousness that they'd like to share with the rest of the group, with the larger group? So one here. She's coming.
I've had people tell me that people from underrepresented groups in particular fields, quote, don't exist.
Like don't exist at all.
Yeah. How are we supposed to diversify? They don't exist. How are we supposed to find them? They're not there.
There could be still an obscure field or two where that might be the case, but in the overwhelming majority of the cases, that is simply untrue. In fact, my perspective on this, and I'm going to use some of these to share some strategies and perhaps even some insights. Ours is a well-resourced university, even in the fields where there are only a few. Have we not the confidence and the resources and the reputational capital and the advantage of the remarkable city in which we live to compete for those few? I think that sometimes we sort of just presume that those people are not recruitable when there are only a few of them. But that's in the absence of trying, right? That is a presumption without any evidence that that things will be different. Sometimes people will point back anecdotally to, well, we tried like 5 years ago to get this one Latina, and she had 5 job offers and she turned us down. So therefore, we probably shouldn't try ever again to get another Latina. And that's bad thinking. Again, especially for a university with our rank, reputation, and resources. So excellent. More outrageousness. 2 more examples.
Okay, this happened 30 years ago when I first came here. We were going through a search committee, we were going through the search process, we were going through CVs, and anytime an Asian candidate came up, one of the search committee members had marked all of their grammatical errors, all of their spelling mistakes, and because one of the qualifications is written communication skills, they eliminated all of the Asian candidates. But we had a European candidate who was educated at the Sorbonne, and they had just as many errors in their resume and in their cover letter. And the chair of the search committee said, we have to keep that person. They're from the Sorbonne. They're obviously educated.
So that was 30 years ago, nonetheless outrageous, but 30 years ago, by a show of hands across the room, how many of you think that that sort of thing could happen right now in 2018 here at this university? That is a staggering, not quite consensus, but right? It is staggering to me, like how many of us believe that that kind of thing could happen now. Great example. One more. I thought I saw a hand in this region. Did I? No? Okay. I meant over there. Here, there.
Someone at our table shared that someone in her department said that she didn't count as diverse, as contributing to diversity in their department because she's Asian, not Black or Latino. Latinx.
Yeah, I really want to disrupt this notion that Asian American, and Pacific Islander colleagues don't count. I offered the example, and it was not a critique of my home school. It was just a matter of fact, right? That I think it is important for us to map where our Asian and Asian American and Pacific Islander colleagues are across the university, in terms of schools, departments, as well as rank and faculty type. I think that's important. I also think that given the number of Asian American students and international students from Asian countries who we have in our undergraduate student body, that a university that prides itself on its proximity to the Pacific Rim, ought to have Asian and Asian American faculty. Okay, one more, or was that 3? That was 3. Okay, I'm going to move us ahead. What we will do occasionally, I peppered these throughout the presentation. There will be a couple times where we'll stop, and I have a few, say what now? Opportunities for us where we're going to do some rehearsing. When someone says this, what do you say back to them? Like Asian American people don't count as diverse. What do you say back when a colleague says that in a search process, right? So I have a few of them peppered, and they will surprise you when they come up. Let me move us ahead, and I'm going to do what Elizabeth asked me to do. She did ask me to spend some time talking about implicit bias, so I want to make sure that we do that because it very much plays itself out in faculty search processes. The only sort of caveat that I will offer is that the bias is not always implicit. As some of you have talked about at your tables when you were sharing examples of outrageousness, I imagine that some of those were actually explicit. But let's do talk about implicit bias, which is very, very much on trend right now. So I'm going to show you a quick little video clip that the New York Times produced. They made a series, actually, of these short videos about implicit bias. I think there are like a dozen of them. And this is one that helps explain what it is and where it comes from.
Implicit bias.
Implicit bias.
Implicit bias.
2016 was the year that implicit bias went somewhat mainstream.
Yeah, so when Hillary Clinton mentioned implicit bias in the debates, our phones started blowing up, all our friends started emailing us about it.
But what is implicit bias? Implicit biases are basically thought processes that happen without you even knowing it. Little mental shortcuts that hold judgments you might not agree with. And sometimes those shortcuts are based on race. First, some clarity. Saying someone has an implicit bias is different from calling someone a racist.
The word racist is a highly loaded term, right, here in American society. A lot of times, when people are using it, they're thinking of the kind of old-fashioned Ku Klux Klan style racist.
But implicit bias isn't anywhere near that, explicit.
Implicit bias is something that comes out of ordinary mental functioning, out of how the mind normally works.
We've all grown up in a culture with media images, news images, conversations we heard at home, our education. Think of that as a fog we've been breathing our whole life. We'd never even realized it, what we were taking in.
And that fog causes associations that lead to biases.
I somehow know that if you say peanut butter, I'm going to say jelly. That's an association that's been ingrained in me because throughout my life, peanut butter and jelly are together. And in many forms of media, there is an over-representation of black men and violent crime being paired together.
And because of that, I actually deep down inside have been taught that black men are violent and aggressive and not to be trusted, that they're criminals, that they're thugs.
With all those associations, I'm not trying to let us off the hook, but in some ways, none of us stood a chance.
Starting today, we'll post a video a day dealing with one challenge of understanding implicit bias and its relationship to race and exploring ways we might combat the problem.
One more thing, if you're seeing this and thinking that it doesn't apply to you, well, you might be falling prey to the blind spot bias. That's a scientific name for a mental bias that allows you to see biases in others, but not in yourself. We're biased.
So the major takeaway here, and there's a whole science around this, There are researchers at Harvard and lots of other universities that are paying a lot of attention to implicit bias. In fact, Jody Armour, who is on our faculty here in the Gould School of Law, does some work on implicit bias as well. The whole point here is around these implicit associations. So we bring to faculty search processes mental images that may not be altogether conscious or at the forefront of our consciousness about who a professor is, what a professor looks like, where that person comes from, and so on. Much of that is because of our own sort of socialization throughout our entire lives. In our center, we have done implicit bias work with children. And, there are kids who are in elementary school who have very troubling and problematic perspectives about the racial other. There are boys in elementary school who have very sexist points of view about girls. Now, they're like 6 years old, right? Like a 6-year-old sexist wasn't born that way, right? Like he was socialized to have particular points of view about girls and women through various forms of media, perhaps what he's observed in his own family, so on and so forth. So those elementary school kids that we study, they grow up to be college students, and they find themselves in focus groups and interviews with us when we travel around the country doing campus climate studies. Our climate studies always include students of color and white students. We've never done a climate study that didn't have white students in it. One of the things that we hear most often from white students is that they learn very little, oftentimes not a thing, about race or racism, or even about the ways that they have been socialized throughout their lifetimes to think about the racial other. So imagine these are undergraduates whom we are studying. They then go on to graduate school. Well, in our review of curricula across academic fields in graduate education, there's very little evidence in the curriculum of many graduate programs, PhD programs, master's programs, that people are finally, that's where they're like really doing a deep dive into more deeply understanding themselves and the ways that they've been conditioned to think about other racial and ethnic groups. So then they finish their PhDs and they become professors, and they bring those biases to the classroom. And it plays itself out in, like low expectations for students of color that those faculty members are like not even aware of, right? But it also plays itself out in faculty search processes. When we're thinking about like who's qualified, who has a shot here, what does a professor look like here? There's a funny thing that comes up in search committee deliberations that isn't quite on the position announcement that we write. It's this whole matter of fit. And the conversation usually goes something like this. There are these two candidates. There's this one. She's really good and she seems really promising, but there's just something about her that makes us wonder if she's going to be a good fit. As someone mentioned earlier, one of our colleagues here, that when the faculty is overwhelmingly male and disproportionately white, as is the case with our faculty, especially, by the way, those numbers that I presented earlier, they were not disaggregated by rank. So our faculty becomes even whiter and even more male when we get to the full professor level and so on. So yeah, you're right. Like, she isn't a good an exact fit for what has been established there, right, over the years by faculty after faculty after faculty that has not included people that were not white and or male. Again, I'm not dissing my two schools, but in one of my schools, the other one, Marshall, I'm the only tenure track black faculty member tenured black faculty member in the whole school. The only one. Well, yeah, I could imagine how I might not be a good fit for that environment, right? I could easily imagine that. I love my time there. It's wonderful. I do feel like a good fit, and it's great colleagues there. Some of them are here in the room. I really appreciate them. But the point here, right, is that even the notion of fit itself is an implicit association that oftentimes lead to a biased outcome. Let's talk about some other scholarship, right? I think it is important for us to know how to read and recognize bias in all of its forms in search processes. So not just the outrageous comments that some of our search committee members may make, but also in the artifacts that are produced. You can't see this very well, I imagine, but it is an article that I assigned in my gender and college course that I've taught for many years. And it is about exploring the color of letters of recommendation for women and men who were applying to be on a medical school faculty. So these researchers did an actual analysis of these recommendation letters. Perhaps unsurprising to some of you, the letters that were written for women had all sorts of gendered language, like, oh, she's lovely. She will get along well with people. Not enough about her intellectual contribution, the quality of her ideas, substantive examples of her contributions to collaborative teamwork or to lab work, and so on. Those kinds of things are the things that we're looking for when we're hiring faculty members, and we get seduced by the letters that are written that actually talk about substantive academic matters, not just she's a lovely person and a nice girl. Like, I think we have to be much more thoughtful when we read those letters, and much more conscious about how there's solid evidence that letters are written very differently for women and for men, as well as for white applicants and for applicants of color. Let me say just a bit more about the latter. Because there are so few faculty members of color in particular fields, many students of color end up with white advisors. Totally fine. My advisor was white. He's amazing. He was really, really, really great. I love him still. I love him. He didn't publish a thing with me. Nothing. Nothing. Not a single paper, nothing. He was very nice to me. He didn't treat me in a racist manner or any of that. But he published with white students. So when I'm on the job market, it may appear that, oh, well, this guy Harper, like, he's a loser. Like, he doesn't have any publications. I think we have to be more thoughtful about the disproportionate investment that white faculty members make into white students and sometimes into Asian and Asian American students. And our research makes clear that that investment is because in many times they actually see those students as laborers in their labs, and they throw their names on papers because frankly, they've done like all of the statistical work and so on, right? So it's not really investment. It may look like it, right? But the point here is that for Native American, Latinx, and for African American applicants, especially at the assistant professor level, that, you know, we may erroneously presume that they don't have quality ideas or that they're not going to be productive. I think we have to understand that people didn't invest in them. That doesn't mean that they're unlikely to succeed. It does mean, though, that we have to ask a different set of questions when we engage with them about their prospects on our faculty. Let me stop there for a second and invite you to either react to what I just said or ask me a question.
We're not supposed to look up what candidates are. Maybe you can tell some names or things like that. So how can you begin to, oops, sorry. I'm just wondering during the search process how to overcome the hurdle when you have maybe 60 applicants and you don't know their race and ethnicity, and you're putting them in the yes and no piles. So how do you begin to, that early part of the design process, or search process, account for some of these things?
I wonder who said that we're not allowed to look up people. Honestly, okay, so I'll give it to you that when we have the 60 applicants, that might be a lot of people to look up. But it has been my experience on every search committee that I've been on that when we make a short list, say of even like 15 that we want to maybe do Skype interviews with or whatever, we absolutely go to web pages and LinkedIn and other places to see, if there are other things that we might find in addition to the cover letter and CV, perhaps, that they provided. I think it might be perhaps an unwritten rule that you're not supposed to look people up, but don't we look up people? I think we look up people all the time.
Hi, April Timms. I'm from Dornsife. To do with feelings of privilege and experiences of being able to ask for what you want and say what you need. And often students of color that I've mentored, as well as myself, have not felt like you can say that. There's this idea of authority, you have respect for it, and you don't necessarily go in and fight for what you need. So that is how I think a lot of this experience of non-investment happens, because the students are quiet, faculty assume they don't have anything to contribute, but in fact it's just they're not taking the time to sort of elicit that information because they're used to white students who usually say, hey, this is what I need, this is what I want, this is what I can contribute. So I just wanted to add to that.
Yeah, that was good. What I would add to what you just said too, there are also other explanations. One of them is stereotype threat. Claude Steele is a brilliant psychologist at Stanford who's done pioneering work on this. And essentially, there is a threat for students who are underrepresented. This happens to women in the sciences, and certainly to people of color in most academic fields, that there's a threat of confirming the stereotypes that your professor and your classmates and others may have about you, and it affects what you contribute. It affects your performance outcomes, right? Like if you're the only Native American student in the class, for instance, you realize that when you say something, that people may very well attribute your statement to every Native American person, and that you are the ambassador for all Native American and indigenous peoples. That is incredibly distracting, right? So when there is an engagement opportunity, say in a class or in a lab, the Native American student, for instance, is rehearsing in his head, right? Like, okay, what am I gonna say? How am I gonna say it so that, it doesn't come out in a way that, makes my people look bad? By the time he finally fashions that, the conversation has moved on, right? The engagement opportunity has passed. I don't think that the onus for correcting that is entirely or should be entirely on the student. I think that faculty members have to be much more conscious of the kinds of racial and cultural and gender dynamics that are happening in classrooms and labs and on faculties. Sharoni?
Sharoni Little, Marshall School of Business, and I want to kind of combine two comments. I think when you look at this notion of the ivory tower, the label is intentional and I think historical. And I think also we have to say, I did some research on academically successful Black PhD students, and so some of these issues around research. I too am an alum of Indiana University, and my cohort was 17. I was the only Black female, and I spoke up. However, it was choices made by faculty as to who not only they wanted to do research with, but what topics they wanted to do research on. And so my interest in race was not necessarily an interest of some of the faculty there. And so therefore they made decisions about not only who they wanted to do research with, but also who they wanted to publish with. And I think for us, we have to grapple with the conversation of, is this an issue of who can generate knowledge? And we have to question the historical intellectualism conversation about when we think about who is a professor, who can generate knowledge and has the intellectual ability to be in front of the class or to create journal articles. And that's something, until we grapple with that, I don't think we can get to some of the tools around what happens in the search process.
Yeah, absolutely. What I'll add to that, Sharani, that was super helpful. What I will add to that is we have to also think about how implicit bias shows up in the review process for peer-reviewed academic work. And I'm thinking about your important perspectives about numbers, right? Most editorial boards of most journals are comprised of people who are not people of color. So more specifically, white. Like most journal editors are white. Their editorial review boards are overwhelmingly, sometimes entirely white. So if there are scholars of color, and not all scholars of color have race interest, but if there are scholars of color like you and me, Sharani, who have race interest, it could be that when those manuscripts get submitted to those journals, the reviewers don't know what to do with that kind of work because they don't do that work themselves, and they don't quite know how to judge the quality and the goodness and the fitness of your paper for that particular journal. We have to keep all of those factors in mind as we are making judgments about people's CVs and their productivity and their deservingness of being here. We have to ask a very different set of questions. I'm going to get into very specifically in a moment here, like strategies, and we're going to get beyond sort of talking I think it's some really important like conceptual ways here, and like we're gonna talk like real strategies in a moment. But I think I saw 2 more hands back here. Okay, 3 more hands, and then we'll move forward.
Hi, Greg Autry in the Gripe Center in the Marshall School. The categorizations, I think, can sometimes be troublesome, and I know you don't set these, they're set off at the federal level and all, but specifically the Asian Pacific Islander category, I think is really, really awkward. As somebody who's grew up in Hawaii quite a bit, I think the Pacific Islanders are seriously punished by being grouped into that category.
I agree.
The experience of a young Samoan person in California has nothing to do with the experience of a Korean American person or somebody from Japan, and we really should look at that and push back on that, because are there any Pacific Islanders in here? How many of you have a colleague who's a Pacific Islander? That's good, but not very many. Yeah. Anyway, I think that's a real problem, and it's a small group, but they are not getting the attention they deserve.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Very, very, very good guidance, I think, for the leadership of our university as we track these kinds of numbers over time to do a better job of disaggregating them more responsibly. I think it's a superb idea.
Oh, hi, I'm Tim Bibler, Sociology. I just wanted to add one more element into the mix here. Thinking about what you were saying regarding review committees and how we're looking at files and candidates, say, for a new assistant professorship, there is this implicit bias, which is a really great insight, where the candidate may not look like us, the composition of the search committee, but then accompanying that, the file may not look quite like the norms we're used to as well. If, for example, the hypothetical you gave where somebody didn't get an opportunity to publish with their mentor or something like that, there may be a different quality to the file, but the institutional part is that here, at least, many of us have had an experience, traumatic experiences of tenure turndowns or failed retentions where you had a very strong uniform faculty group in support of a candidate that then got turned down at higher levels up the chain. And what happens there is that leads to this eye towards selection at the get-go, where we're looking for files that are already kind of close to tenurable going in, right? And so then you're even more kind of, because you're gun shy. If you've got a candidate coming out with very few publications but some really good ideas, and you're going, oh my God, in 6 years from now, is UCAP, are they going to have enough on all of the metric madness to pass all the levels of the chain, this is another element of that's operating in all of this, and I just wanted to toss that out there as well. I think that sometimes there's a disjuncture between the faculty read and the university read.
Very helpful. Thank you. And it's a thing that we hear about often, actually, especially there is this trend now of expecting doctoral students who are starting as assistant professors to be almost ready-made, right? I think that is an unfortunate sort of, it relieves us of our responsibility of developing our colleagues and mentoring and supporting them when we expect them to come with CVs that, we can already sort of predict that, yeah, they're definitely going to get tenure without, again, spending 5 years with them, helping them to, really develop a CV that that prepares them for tenure.
John Ogilvie.
It's on.
John Ogilvie, Keck School of Medicine. And I apologize if this question doesn't come across as nice as I want to do it, but I don't think about it as often as you do, and I'm here to learn. So you mentioned looking people up during a search. And I don't think we can actually ask them about their race or ethnicity, but what do you mean look them up? You mean look at their picture and just from your own kind of bias about what they look like, put them into a category? Or what are you saying with that?
Yeah, sure. What I'm saying is that on all the search committees that I've been on, when I look up people, I'm not looking them up for their race. I'm looking them up to gather more intel about who they are and more data beyond what's in the cover letter and the CV. So I am not going to pretend. It would be disingenuous of me to pretend that when I go to their webpage, I don't happen to notice that there's a photograph there of the person accompanying all the other things that I've gone there to look for. Yeah, and let me also not pretend that for me that it's always accidental that I just happen to stumble upon a photograph when I go to a webpage. We're talking about intentionality here, moving from bias to intentionality. I think that sometimes it is important to look people up. How else might you be intentional? Well, actually, I have an answer to that I'm going to share in about like 4 slides from now, like a super, super intentional way. I will acknowledge that it is problematic to go to a web page and make some determination about the race or ethnicity of a person based on their photograph. You might not be able to make a fully accurate determination. Sometimes those differences are a bit more obvious than others. And I think we'd be being dishonest if we were like, well, no, like I'm colorblind. I don't see that this person is clearly an Asian American woman, right? Like clearly she is. Yeah, I think I'll stop there. Hey, I better keep us on time. Say what now? Here's the first one. So take literally just 3 minutes at your tables. Someone in a search committee meeting says, I understand we don't have as much diversity in this pool of applicants, but we've got what we've got. When someone says that, what do you say in response? So take 3 minutes and, reach some consensus at your table about what you say in response when someone says this. We got some great speakbacks. When someone says this, what do you say back? Ginger Clark.
I actually had this exact thing happen when I was sitting on a search committee, and one of our, one of the search committee members said, this is what we have, and then another of our senior faculty stopped and said, that's not good enough. We need to go back out and we need to recruit better to get our pool diversified. So in some respects, we paused the search, went back out.
Let's play this out though, Ginger. Keep the mic for a minute. So someone says that, right? then normally the next thing that we hear is, oh, but we're going to get behind, and time is running out, and we're going to lose like the really qualified candidates who are already in the pool by going back, or like maybe like funding for the position is going to go away if we don't hurry up and fill it. Then what?
Yeah, all of that took place. There was actually a conversation that occurred among the committee members, and this one particular faculty member stood his ground and said, you guys, we cannot in good faith go forward with a pool that is not diverse enough to faithfully say that we actually looked and tried to bring in diverse candidates. And so the next step ended up being somebody needed to go talk to the dean and have a conversation about this now situation. And I believe, this was years ago, but I believe what did happen is it was paused. We did go back out and do some recruiting.
Yeah, oh, no, Ginger, keep the mic. So, Ginger's my good friend. We're really close. Ginger, I could actually use your help with something. Okay. So I think there's a distraction in the room about when I said about looking people up, that I've done that as a part of every search committee that I've been on, not always looking for their race or their gender, but just to get more information beyond, what's in the file. How might a search committee know that there isn't any diversity in the pool?
I think we looked them up.
Well, I'll be darned. How else would you know?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, that was very helpful. Thank you. We have one here.
I just want to answer that question. In our CVs, we get about close to 300 every year. And in our CVs, it is usually clear because of affiliations and other type of conferences they've attended and so on, especially in fresh graduates. You see Society of Women Engineers, Society of Hispanic Engineers.
Not a lot of men in the Society of Women Engineers.
Huh?
Not a lot of men in the Society of Women Engineers, right?
No, I mean, so we actually, I think we don't have to look them up. I mean, if we are skittish about it, at least in engineering, we are able to. I have never been surprised by the 20 people who come in through the front door that I wasn't expecting that.
Fair enough. Very good. Maybe two more speakbacks from your tables. Someone says this. What do you say back? Larissa?
The perspective too, besides, I think the obvious is to go back and look, right? But that this idea that pedigree is excellence, and that we are looking, that many institutions, and ours is not exempt of this, looking at Ivy League graduates, I mean, at a particular pedigree, that when there's a perception in the community that it might be more important than excellence in research and other things, that applicants might not apply, because in this particular elite universities, they're looking for Ivy League graduates, which by definition, we're already kind of eliminating a big pool.
Yeah, I want to take this a bit further, Larissa. This was incredibly helpful. I want to take it a bit further. Might it say something about us and how people perceive us and what our reputation as a university might be if we have these extraordinary academic programs and very highly ranked schools at our university, and we're located in an amazing city, and very few women or very few people of color or very few gay and lesbian people actually apply for a job here? Might that say something about us? I think that it demands that we do some self-reflection as a search committee, as a faculty, about wait a minute now. Why is it that we haven't gotten a more diverse pool, given again the extraordinary nature of our academic prowess here? All right, was there another? Okay, one more here, and then I'm going to move us to some like strategies
I'm
and stuff.
actually not answering the question. I'm just going to add to what the last speaker mentioned, and that is we did a search a few years ago, and among the candidates was somebody who had a PhD from Harvard, who was Latino, but he was teaching at an institution that the then associate dean said, no, 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 no. It's not a peer institution. It's much lower than ours, and USC will not accept a candidate like this. And I don't know if this is true now. This was only 8 years ago, 7 or 8 years ago. But that's one of the things that happens. There may be some people in the pool that just weren't paid attention to because of that kind of discriminatory reference. That person, their first teaching job, and I pointed out at the time, sometimes the first teaching job of a minority candidate or a woman is not at a top tier institution. And that doesn't mean that the quality of their work is bad. Let's look at the quality. But it was absolutely the peer institution, forget it.
You know, there's a thing that happens. This is a great, very helpful example. There's a thing that happens where people personify the institution, where they say, "Oh, USC wouldn't hire a person that comes from a place like that." Who is USC? This also happens, frankly, with UCAP, where people will just make some sort of predictions. It could be that it's based on 10 years ago trends and evidence, perhaps, but they will hide out behind, oh, well, when this gets to UCAP, like, you know, it won't fly. Do we know for sure? Right? I don't, yeah, that happens a lot, and I often experience it and make sense of it as excuse making to not hire a person or to try to go after a person. Again, because of maybe there was this one time 10 years ago or 5 years ago where we tried to hire someone from, you know, some other tier institution and it didn't work. But that doesn't mean that, like you said, if we could really point to the quality of the work that the person has produced at that institution, absolutely, I would imagine that Elizabeth would be delighted to get that file and would not say, nope, I don't care how accomplished this person is, how many articles and grants and stuff they have. They started at a third tier place. They're not gonna, no, I don't. I've gotten to know Elizabeth very well. She won't do that. By the way, she's not USC. We all are, right? Like, I think that that's just really important. Okay, so, hey, I'm gonna move us. Okay, fine. Okay, one more, sorry.
Kelvin Davies, Leonard Davis School of Gerontology. I think that's an excellent point, by the way, and we are being asked to look at peer institutions in all kinds of ways. But my point is somewhat different. I'm sitting here having something of an epiphany in that there are things I'm hearing about graduate school and graduate students that I didn't know existed. So I'm in biological sciences. You can't get a PhD in biological sciences or medically related sciences or in chemistry without doing research in a mentor's lab, which will be published with your mentor. So we don't have the situation where you would ever not have a publication with your mentor. You wouldn't get your dissertation done. You wouldn't get out. This speaks to a clear division between the sciences and the social sciences, the natural sciences, where our whole model of graduate education is different, and our model of producing future leaders and future professors is very different. And I'm wondering if we need, in our strategies as we move forward for USC and greater diversity, to look not just at the whole university, but look how we do it by discipline and how differently that affects our results and our goals.
Let me ask you then, why then is the composition of the faculty not more diverse in STEM fields?
Yeah, well, as many STEM people will tell you, there's a real pipeline problem. It's not the only issue, I understand, but it's definitely a problem.
Okay. I'm going to come back to the pipeline issue in a bit. But in the interest of time, I am going to move us to the next part. And it is about writing position descriptions with some serious degree of intentionality. This is one of the things of which I am most proud. We did a search last year in our education policy K-12 education program in Rasier, and we crafted this position announcement The Rasier School of Education invites applicants for an open rank tenure track faculty position with the focus on advanced quantitative methods. Notice how in the first sentence, we didn't depart from what's academically important, the focus of what we're looking for in terms of someone's methodological approach. Okay, I want to start there. Next sentence. The successful candidate's research will use sophisticated econometric, statistical, and other advanced quantitative methods to answer questions related to the implementation and causal effects of district, state, and/or federal pre-K education policies. Okay, again, we're still talking academic substance here. There isn't a cheapening or a watering down of what we were looking for in this particular search. But then it goes on to say candidates with the research focus on policies related to equity and improving opportunity and outcomes for historically underserved groups are especially desired. Didn't say that's the only thing that we desired. It didn't say that we desired that more than the other two sentences, right? But it does say that we especially desire people who have all these things, right? This position is part of a multi-year strategy to recruit scholars focused on equity in education, which signals to prospective applicants that if you come aboard, you're not going to be alone, you're not going to be the only one, you're not going to experience intellectual isolation because you're the only one who's thinking about these kinds of questions and these topics. You know, there is a strategy. It also signals that the school has a strategy, which is, for me, like a articulation of commitment. It then goes on to say candidates should have an independent program of research, blah, blah, blah. All these things are important. We want you to have a writing sample, contact information for 3 references. The letter, the cover letter, should include specific examples of applicants' commitment to equity and improving opportunity and outcomes for historically underserved groups. Again, an extraordinary example of how to get applicants to reflect on the contribution that they would make to an intellectual community and a student body that is as diverse as ours at USC. I think that that makes a lot of sense, right? And then, of course, there's the obligatory USC is an equal opportunity affirmative action. That last thing we have to have, but it can't be the only statement of commitment and investment in diversity, equity, and inclusion. It has to be strategically and thoughtfully woven out throughout the position description, as was the case here for Rasier. I can't remember, but I bet my associate dean does. Roughly how many applications did we get for this faculty position, Larry? Yeah, this is the tenure track one. About 280 applications. The 3 who emerged as finalists for this position, all 3 of them were people of color. I can absolutely guarantee you that Larry and the search committee and Darlene Robles, who was on the search committee, that they didn't go through and discriminate against all of the white people who applied. But there were a lot more people of color who applied for this position in a field that frankly doesn't tend to have a lot of people of color. The reputation for education policy is that among, you know, the various sort of sub-disciplines in education, that it tends to be among the whiter. But yet, this one produced an extraordinarily diverse pool of highly qualified people. I can tell you right now that 2 of the 3 finalists came from Vanderbilt and the 3rd came from Stanford. Peer institutions for sure, right? I think that that was not a coincidence. It was because of the way that the position announcement was masterfully crafted. So my advice to you is that search committees have to take the time and care to articulate a stance around equity, diversity, and inclusion as something that you're looking for, in addition to methods expertise, in addition to lots of papers and grants and a track record of grants and all that. Like, you have to articulate it in a convincing fashion in the position announcements. So few position announcements are crafted in this way. in the interest of time, we're going to skip this one. I won't rob you of another. There's another later. But this one, this applicant's degree is from a university from which we don't typically hire, is a thing that we often hear in search committees. I'm going to go back to, I'm going to stop looking across the room. I'm losing track now. What someone said around here. You have to read the work. There are these shortcuts that we make in admissions where we look at GRE scores or SAT scores and GPAs to determine who gets cut. That same sort of shortcutting happens in faculty search processes, that we see that a person has a PhD, say from Howard University, a historically black university. We're like, we don't have anybody on our faculty who went there. No, you don't say. But that doesn't mean that the person doesn't have great ideas, that the person doesn't have work that is super high quality and very thoughtful and potentially groundbreaking work. I think we do a disservice to the institution when we repeatedly, to our university, when we repeatedly look for people who come from the same places because they bring the same old tired ideas from those places. Sorry, that was like I felt strongly about that. Could you tell? If we are going to be innovative, if we are going to be transformative, and certainly if we are going to be responsible to the students who come from a wide range of racial and ethnic and cultural backgrounds, the faculty that we hire have to also come from a wide range of perspectives and places and so on. It's just super important. So the speak back here, I'm just going to give you the answer. There's one right answer. Did we read the work? Did we read the cover letter? Let's not make these shortcuts by eliminating people just because they didn't go to particular places. Okay, let me give some examples of racializing and gendering outreach. It is not illegal nor improper to send a message to colleagues across the country, letting them know that we have a search. I mean, we do that all the time. So I did not even a version of this talk, but a different talk for Annenberg back in the spring. And I used this example, so I'm recycling it. So this is how it typically goes. Dear Professor Y, USC Annenberg, or Viterbi, or Marshall, or Gould, is searching for a new assistant professor of communication. Please see the attached position description and share it with your PhD students who are on the market. Many thanks, Professor X. When people, first off, these tend to go to closed networks, closed academic networks, like people that we know and that we have relationships with, who tend to, in many cases, look a lot like us, come from the same places that we've come from, share the same sort of academic space that we share in professional associations and such. Their students tend to also not be very diverse, they're PhD students. So this gets for us some applications from their PhD students, but it doesn't help to really deepen the diversity of the pool. Let's see if this might work instead. It's not much longer. Dear Professor B, USC Annenberg is searching for a new assistant professor of communication. Please see the attached position description. We obviously want to hire the most qualified person. Given how few women and people of color we have here on our faculty, we are especially interested in selecting this person from a diverse applicant pool. Let me stop there and just say that I was very, very careful with my word choice here. I didn't say that we want to hire a woman or a person of color. What I did say is that we want to select this person for this assistant professor position from a diverse pool of applicants. Please share the attached position description with your PhD students and others in your academic networks. Contact me if you know any students who will help us actualize our diversity goals. I will personally reach out to them. I am just going to check with the legal minds here. Is there something legally out of bounds here? No. Are we sure? I think we have to be like absolutely sure. Okay, so the expert here tells me that, yeah, this is like totally like cool and in bounds and like not like at all illegal. I bet though, Patrick, before I asked that question, I bet there were lots of people in the room thinking, you can't send an email like that. Like, he's gonna get us sued, or like, that's so improper. Like, it's against the law. You can't name a law, huh? I can't. Yeah, okay, all right. Patrick says we can do it, so, and Elizabeth co-signed, so but you can see how this kind of outreach is substantively very different. It might even be that you're still sending this to your closed academic network that isn't diverse. What it will do, though, and I've seen this happen time and time again, I will get this email forwarded to me from a white colleague who says, I got this from my friend at Annenberg. I don't know anybody and I don't have any students, but I bet you do, right? I'm just passing this along for you to share in your networks. And I always do. That's how you widen the reach of a position description. Let me give you another example. You can't read this. It's like way too small to type. But I'm in this group of full professors who are black. It's like not really a formal group. We like wish each other happy birthday and stuff. But there's an email chain with a bunch of us, right? Time and time again, people are sending that email that I got forwarded to me from a colleague. They send it to this group. Arguably, this is the most influential group of black academics in the field of education. So when they get this email, we then send it out and forward it to our networks, which ultimately reach hundreds, if not thousands of people. That is a way of extending the reach by finding, perhaps people who are among the most influential and well-known people of color or women in your academic field and encouraging them to send it to their networks. Almost always, this happens just this way. Okay, we gotta go beyond typical passive advertising. What normally happens is we put a position announcement on the USC website, perhaps on the website for your individual school. We put it in the Chronicle of Higher Education, sometimes in Inside Higher Ed, not as often in Diverse Issues in Higher Ed, which is a magazine. These are traditional ways of advertising faculty positions. If we keep doing the same thing in the same way, we're going to keep getting what we've always gotten. I think these things only go so far. We have to be much more intentional about ensuring that our position announcements make their way to diverse networks. We are going to help at the USC Race and Equity Center. On November 16th, we are launching what we're calling PRISM. PRISM is a professional network and professional recruiting tool for higher education, for colleges and universities. There's one side of it that is for administrators and staff, another side of it that is for faculty. Really, PRISM is aiming to change the face of higher education and the face of the higher education workplace. We're doing this by leveraging our networks. We're literally, and I do mean literally, having thousands of highly qualified people of color across the country, across academic fields and disciplines, create profiles, standardized profiles that include things like their education level or where their degrees are from. It includes downloadable PDFs of their CVs, downloadable publication samples. It lets you know if they are currently open to opportunities. I'm going to say a bit more about even if they're not open to opportunities, right? But the point here, right, is that colleges and universities will subscribe to PRISM. Anybody on the campus can use it. It is not a hiring tool. It is a recruitment tool. It is an advertising tool. So you could very easily go into PRISM, sort by academic field, and let's say you're not looking for an assistant professor. Let's say you're looking for a full professor. You could sort by academic field, by rank, by sub-discipline within a field, even by methods, and all these things that people are putting into their standardized profiles, and it will return for you a set of results. You could then look at those people's profiles and their CVs and their publications. If they look interesting to you, you could direct message them and say, USC Marshall, USC Viterbi, has this job. We want to make sure that you've seen the job announcement. That's it. Like, there's nothing more, right? But we're not waiting for the candidate to maybe or maybe not see the ad in the Chronicle in which we list our positions. We're making it easy for you to actually make sure that those people know that these opportunities exist. Now, I did mention a moment ago that there's a little button that someone can click if they're like currently seeking or open to new opportunities or not. At least 2 people in this room know that what I'm about to say is true. I was not really open to new opportunities. I was happy as I could be at the University of Pennsylvania. That is really true. I had a very fulfilling career there. I could have easily imagined myself staying there for the rest of my career. Until the dean of the Harvard Graduate School of Education called me on my cell phone and said, I know you're going to tell me that you're really happy at Penn, but might we get you to think about coming to Harvard? Maybe. I could have sworn that I was like really happy where I am though, and that I was going to like stay here like forever, but it's Harvard. Sure, I'll talk to you, right? Because of that, like suddenly I was open to new opportunities when there was a new opportunity at USC. And I'm very smart, so I chose like very smartly. Hence, I'm here. But the point that I'm making here is that even I didn't think I was open to new opportunities. So when you're searching for someone, particularly and especially, right, if you're in a field that doesn't have a lot of diversity, and there's this extraordinary person, and you see their profile in PRISM, and it's red but not green, signaling that they're close, you might still write them a note and say, hey, just take a look at this position announcement. Just want to make sure that you saw it, and we think we think you should apply. We think you would be good for us. That's not out of bounds either, right? Anything illegal yet? Okay. Questions, reactions? Question. This is a great question. The question is, how does this account for the travel ban? Frankly, I'm not a know-it-all. I don't know, actually. This is great. This is a great question that I'm going to pass on to the developers. We are 2 months away from launch. I don't know that this is a question that we've considered. This is a good one. Here, I'll paraphrase. Essentially, he's saying that there are 7 countries from which people can apply, but ultimately can't come. I think that's a very serious
Or
concern.
they could come. Maybe they, you know, if you offer them a job, they could get a visa. But to come in with a month's notice and give a job talk, that's very unlikely. You know, given what we know informally with what the State Department does with any kind of visitor from these countries, we're claiming that we can recruit the most qualified candidates, or we will, you know, increase our diversity. Well, a great way to do that is hire international applicants, and we're encountering a future where there will always be a list of countries where you can't realistically get into the country to do those job talks or to meet with potential colleagues.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like USC really has a plan for that yet.
Totally fair stance and point. It's an important one. It's a really good one. One cautionary note that I'm going to offer to us. I have seen other universities around the country diversify their faculties overwhelmingly with people from other countries, which I think is great to have minds from around the world and to be an equal opportunity employer for folks around the globe. But let's not also forget about domestic diversity, that we actually have people who are born in the U.S. or who are U.S. citizens or who have been here a really long time, who are also brilliant and deserving and need an opportunity too. So I think the point that I'm making here is let's not, and this is not what I'm hearing you say, by the way, but I have seen it elsewhere where people are like, well, yeah, like we'll diversify by just like, you know, bringing in people from other countries. One thing about PRISM, when I mentioned that there are thousands of people of color, let me just say quickly like how we got them or how we're getting them. Year after year after year, we hear college and university deans and department chairs and provosts say to us, we can't find any highly qualified people of color, or there's such a pipeline issue that there just are none. Like, I've like literally heard that, like people are like, yeah, there are none. Meanwhile, because of the work we do at the USC Race and Equity Center, we find ourselves in professional spaces every year with dozens, sometimes hundreds, and altogether thousands of people of color with PhDs who actually would love to work at a place like USC. Would love to, but just can't get a break. Just can't get an opportunity here, can't get noticed at a place like ours. So we're aiming to bridge and close that gap because it's quite a paradox, actually. Yep, so I see a hand back here. So we'll do this one, and then I'm going to move us in a different direction with a different strategy.
So I don't remember the exact language, but in the position announcement you showed, there was language regarding the applicant directly addressing issues of equity and diversity in their application. I believe it's the case across the UC system that all faculty job applicants are required to submit, along with their application, an explicit statement addressing how they will deal with issues of diversity. Is there any reason why we could not include a similar requirement for all faculty job applicants to USC?
I don't have to check with Patrick on this one. Nope, there is no reason why we can't do that.
And if not at the university level, which I imagine would take some amount of time, is this something that we could implement immediately at the department or school level?
Honestly, given the diversity of our student body, even if we can't overnight give them a more diverse faculty, we could at least ensure that the faculty that we do hire to be their teachers and their mentors actually have a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. At the very least, we could do that. I think that's a fantastic idea. You know, it is a thing that is a, dare I say, a best practice of the UCs. There's no reason why we can't adopt some version of that. Yep.
Actually, I can speak to that. We're, in physics and astronomy, we're doing a search, and one of my colleagues on the search committee, Eli Levinson-Falk, who I think is here, actually encouraged us to make that an explicit thing in our ad, and Dawn Seif did approve that, so it has been done. There's at least one example. I was actually going to talk about something else, just briefly on the international aspect. I was on one of the provost task force on diversity from many years back, and we were reviewing all the data and trying to look at where we are. This was maybe a decade ago. And I discovered that I don't count amongst our diversity metrics, or at least then. Maybe things have changed because I'm not a US citizen. And I do think we also need to keep in mind that there's the spirit of what we're trying to do, and there's the legal requirement. And I think as an institution such as we are, we should be doing more than just what the minimum is. So that it's just something I thought I'd throw into the mix. It is sort of ridiculous that there are people who are, helping with the diversity that don't count when we're trying to measure where we are. So.
Absolutely. I very much appreciate that perspective. There's something about the collapsing of particular faculty into, say, a label like international, or even worse, non-resident alien. Yeah, let's not do that. The federal government continues to use that term. Let's not do that. But I hear you, right? That we might in fact have some diversity there that doesn't get accounted for. But I do think that it is important to look at raw numbers and not percentages when we do that, so that we don't convince ourselves that of course we're more, for instance, Black than the Black percentage or the Black raw number might suggest, because we got like Black folks who are from Asia, or from Africa, and from the Caribbean, and from the UK. Maybe by like a quarter percentage point more, or right? Like I think it's important to actually use real numbers. Okay, so yeah, we're gonna skip this one too. There's one more after this. We tried, but we really couldn't find any qualified women or people of color for this search. The answer is, did you look in Prism? Did you tap into networks? Let me see the email that you sent in which you were asking colleagues, to help by forwarding to their PhD students and so on. Did it have some serious language about our commitment and what we're looking for and that sort of stuff? Maybe we should try more of that. But do start with Prism. It's free. It's going to be great. All right. So we're turning the corner here toward the end. I just want to share a few more strategies. And what I'm laying out here is what I think is sort of a 3-level strategy. Part of it speaks to the pipeline concern, and then part of it speaks to intentionality. Sometimes we have to grow our own. So I'm going to give you just one example of how that looks. I started the Grad Prep Academy in 2009, initially to increase the number of Black undergraduate men who would go on to PhD programs in top schools of education.
The Grad Prep program has given me something that I didn't think that I could get.
Really what I ended up getting here was I just met some really enlightened young guys doing exactly what I'm doing. These guys are so smart. They're the sharpest I've ever seen.
So now I know people who go to USC, go to UCLA, who go to other schools across the country that I can reach out to in the future.
It's been a blessing to hear the conversations from our speakers, from the staff, from my peers.
The initiative has since evolved to include not only Black undergraduate men, but also Asian American and Pacific Islander, Native American and Latino undergraduate men in education, social policy, human services, and criminal justice, as well as education.
We all have a goal. We all have a common goal for the advancement of our people, but everybody's methodology is a little different.
teaching us how to be leaders and teaching us how to strive for the PhD is what's going to help us break out of like structures of immobility that keep us behind as males of color.
The main thing that I got out of it is I really want to pursue a PhD, especially in education now. After these 3 days, we will all go on to our separate respective campuses and implement the lessons that we've learned here. I feel that I've gained a family.
I really appreciate it. It's just been inspiring just to talk to my fellow peers, because everyone that I've engaged with just has amazing idea and amazing clarity for the most part of what they want to do.
When you come to a place like this and you get a little piece of this person here, a little piece of this person here, it's really eye-opening, you know, and it's really like, wow, there are a lot of different ways to do this, and there's a lot of space for collaboration, and that's what excited me the most.
I think after this program, like I really want to just keep pushing, jump straight into it and get that PhD.
My now former dean at the University of Pennsylvania and I co-created this initiative, this pipeline initiative. Frankly, because when I got to Penn, there was just one black dude in the entire School of Education. And I was like, wait, what? So, you know, we really wanted to build a pipeline to go into not only our own PhD programs there, but other top PhD programs across the country. We really took the best of NSF funded and other funded initiatives around women in sciences to get more women to go into STEM fields. Those have been extraordinarily successful. Sure, there's still progress to be made, but they definitely have done a lot to help diversify the STEM fields by gender. So we took some of those design principles and created this initiative. The men who have now been a part of our Grad Prep Academy have gone on to pursue PhDs at UCLA, Penn, Stanford, Harvard, Duke, Northwestern, Michigan State. You know, those are places that we like to hire from, for sure, right? I think the point that I'm making here is that, and I appreciated what you said earlier about sometimes, you know, these things take a while, right? Like it takes these guys like, I don't know, like 4, sometimes 5 years to get PhDs. But now many of them are starting to become tenure-track faculty members. And I bet I would not have to twist their arms to apply for a job here at USC if we had jobs in the fields that this academy is concerned with. So I think what I'm saying to you is you don't have to replicate this exact model. It doesn't even have to be national in scope. It could be local, something here for USC undergraduates, in which you're preparing them for graduate study in your respective fields across your schools. And you absolutely have the goal of some of them returning to USC with PhDs in hand, perhaps not from here, but from other places around the country. I have a scary suspicion that it would not be hard to convince them to come back to the Trojan family as faculty members once they get their PhDs. So the cost of this initiative is $20,000 a year, $20,000. And we've gotten grants. We've always paid for it out of grants. So for something that costs so little, it sure has had an extraordinary impact in, again, creating a cadre of, in this case, young men of color for the professoriate. One last thing that I'll say is that I'm not the only person who leads initiatives like this. It's why it's important to send the email to a diverse group of influencers, because when I get that email, I send it to these guys. I mean, they're not the only people that I send it to. There are women also that I send it to and other people in my networks. But obviously, like, there's this fraternity of guys that I've created, this intellectual fraternity. Of course I'm going to send your position description to them, especially those who are near the end of their PhD programs and entering the faculty market. So that is sort of a longer term, like, pipeline kind of idea. Let me share another idea. It's what I call low-stakes auditioning and quiet courtship. We led a series at Penn for Scholars of Color where we brought somewhere between 3 and 6 a year. We have that same series here at Rasir, in the Rasir School of Education, a Scholars of Color research lecture series where we bring 6. These are 6 scholars from across the country that we're bringing to give talks. They're just research talks, but they sure do give us an opportunity to maybe see if we like them, maybe see if we want to target them somehow. If they come and they seem to be a good fit for our environment, and their methods are rigorous, and their ideas are fascinating, right? Larry, this will be the last time that I will call on you today. How much does it cost to do this, roughly? Yeah, $10,000. $10,000 a year. We absolutely could find like a mind-blowing star who comes to give one of these talks, and then we go after that person. This is low-hanging fruit that doesn't cost a ton of money. Many of us in our respective academic fields have a tradition of bringing people to give talks all the time. I would argue that when you have a Scholars of Color series, and this was certainly the case for us at Penn, we amassed a reputation. Like, people wanted to be on the list. They wanted to be invited. We became known as a place that is like actually committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion because we were bringing people aboard to share their ideas, and we were amplifying their work in particular ways. One last thing that I'll say about this is that it's also compensatory. When you don't have a lot of faculty of color on your faculty, this is one way of ensuring that your students of color and your white students actually have some engagement with faculty members from different racial and ethnic groups, even if it's just a 2-day or 1 to 2 day sort of encounter. That might be better than nothing. I have seen in the most beautiful, in the most organic ways over the years, people that we've brought for these visiting Scholars of Color talks, there have been PhD students of ours who have instantly formed relationships with them that outlived the 2-day visit. And like suddenly, like I look up, like this literally happened. I was reading a journal, and there were 2 people that I know that we introduced through one of these visiting Scholars of Color series, a professor and a graduate student who had published a paper together from 2 different universities because they met under these circumstances. So this is really good. One last thing that I'll say here, and I don't have a slide for this next thing, we do have the ability here to do targets of opportunity hires. Elizabeth, could you, I don't want to take for granted that everybody knows what that is and how it works. Will you take a moment maybe to just tell us what it is and what it's for and how it usually works?
I'm not sure there's a usual. Occasionally, how it works is that a dean identifies an area or an opportunity that he or she wants to pursue, and then makes the case for us that that's a target of opportunity. So there's not a format, there's not a structure, but it's an opportunity that is available to all of you.
And it means that you could go after a person without advertising a national search, right?
It does, but clearly we prefer to have searches for which they're open to everyone, because sometimes we don't know the best person for the position. So it really should be a targeted, limited tool based on unique situations, I think. Most of the time, I favor open searches.
But it is the thing that we have, right?
Yes, Sean, it is a thing we have. And as the provost alluded to, we're going to have a broader effort in these areas under a new initiative as well, which will be more targeted. I just don't want everybody to go out and say, every search is going to be, I've identified this person in this situation, because sometimes we discover fabulous people in those open searches that dominate.
Absolutely. Absolutely, for sure. I wasn't ego stroking when I mentioned that I got a random call from a Harvard dean on my cell phone asking me to think seriously about joining his faculty. He didn't have a search. They weren't advertising a position. You know, this happens to senior people often across all racial and ethnic groups, actually. One of the most fascinating things about targeted searches is that white people are hired the most often from them. That is absolutely, Elizabeth?
Most of our targets of opportunity do lead to white hires. That's your absolute right.
It's a national phenomenon. It's the darndest thing, right? Like, people, listen, I'm not, you know what? Actually, let me take back, it's the darndest thing. There's a particular aspect of it that I think is darndy. I am committed to USC. I want us to have the most excellent and the most extraordinary faculty. If there are white scholars who are at the very top of our fields, and we're able to get them here, I want them here. I really do. Because their reputation and their good work and so on will for sure help elevate even further the excellence and reputation of our university. I really mean that from the bottom of my heart. I want truly excellent and extraordinary white people here on our faculty. I also, though, want us to go after truly excellent and extraordinary people of color. But I think the part that I think that I feel is a bit darndy about this is that there's a complaint around, well, that's affirmative action, and that, you know, like, how do we hire this person without a search? They must be like less qualified. Well, you didn't say that when we hired the white person who, without a search, right? Like, I think that that's the paradox here that I want us to get beyond. And I want us to have some confidence, too, as a university. I said this earlier, that we have an excellent reputation. We have extraordinary academic programs that are very highly ranked. My friend Ken Shropshire, he would not mind me using him as my example here. Ken was a tenured full professor at the Wharton School of Business at Penn. He had an endowed chair and a center and a radio show on XM radio with the studio in the Wharton School. Most people would think that somebody who has all that and who has that kind of status and stature and reputation and so many books and all that stuff, that guy's not leaving Wharton. I mean, often one of the 3 highest ranked business schools in the country, he's not gonna leave. Ken left to go to Arizona State last year. Why? Because they went after him. Why? Because he's fabulous. We should go after fabulous people, especially in my view, people who are going to both enhance our fabulousness as well as enhance the diversity and the composition. Okay, so in my final minutes here, I do want to talk about retaining the faculty we recruit. There's this really highly cited article that my friend Caroline Turner wrote. Caroline teaches for us in the USC Equity Institutes. Faculty of color in academe, what 20 years of research tells us. Say 20 or 30? 20. It is a meta-analysis of, and a synthesis of 20 years of empirical research about the experiences of faculty of color in colleges and universities. I would encourage every member of our faculty here at USC to read this article. A Elizabeth, might we find a way to get the slides and stuff to everybody who came? Okay, so we'll do that. And the article about the letters of recommendation, this one, I will also include as separate PDFs to accompany the PowerPoint slides. But the point here, and Michael Provost Quick said this in his remarks, his opening framing remarks, that it would be a real shame to enact all these strategies to recruit more faculty of color if we can't keep them here. And if they leave because of toxic climate issues, which is often the case, then they talk about the toxic climate of our university in their academic and professional networks. And then we suddenly amass a reputation for ourselves for not being inclusive, not appreciating the intellectual contributions of scholars of color, and so on. Provost Quick mentioned that we launched about a week ago, actually, the National Assessment of Collegiate Campus Climates, which is a national student-focused climate survey. We are expecting hundreds of colleges and universities and perhaps millions of college students every year to participate in this national survey. The next step for us will be to build one for faculty, a national climate survey for faculty that I hope will give us and other universities like ours helpful data. What we cannot do, though, is explain away and minimize and discredit, perhaps, the perspectives that women and faculty of color and gay and lesbian and trans faculty share with us in surveys, right? You know, a lot of times we convince ourselves that we see higher rates of departure among faculty of color in particular fields because, oh, they're in such high demand because there's so few of them and they have so many great opportunities that's why they left. Yes and no. Yes, sometimes. No, they left also because of the constant and persistent racism and sexism that they experienced. This is really hard to get at in exit interviews. It's really hard. Without naming names, I will say that there's a woman who started on our faculty a year ago as a brand new assistant professor, who left our faculty this summer to join another faculty somewhere else. In her exit interview, she said the reason she was leaving was that she has, a set of family obligations, which were not untrue. That was not altogether untrue. What she did not feel safe communicating was that her school was a hot mess with a very toxic climate. She didn't feel safe enough to communicate that honestly because she's still very early in her career and she is afraid of the penalties that might accrue even as she transitions to another university, right? Yeah, I don't know that exit interviews always get us the truth or the full story. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. I think we have 10 minutes before lunch. All right, we have 10 minutes before lunch. Any reflections, critiques, pushback, ideas, questions? By the way, thank you to those of you who were running the mics. I really, really, really appreciate your assistance over the past couple hours. Thank you for that.
Hello. I very much appreciate this effort, and I think it's a wonderful thing to try to increase the diversity in our faculty. I'm just a little worried that we're moving from white male America first to America first, right? So I was fortunate enough to be given an incredible opportunity as a PhD student to come to the US, and now I'm fortunate enough to be a faculty member at USC. But I'm really worried that in this current climate, where we recently had incredible trouble getting a visa for a PhD student that we recruited from Iran, and then we are, you know, like these statistics are defined in very narrow ways. You have to be a US citizen in order to count as a diverse faculty member. So, like I said, it worries me a little bit that, you know, we're falling into this current climate of nativism. And what makes us really strong in academia is that we're open to anyone who is deserving, right? Regardless of where they come from. And I'm like, could we be losing that? Is there any way that USC could track its own statistics for diversity, as each and every faculty member might find or define themselves as, you know, falling into a diverse group, like I do, but I'm not in that statistic, right? A lot of us do. I have colleagues in my department who are from India, from China, who are women, who belong to like an LGBT community. And I look around and I think we're very diverse. I don't mean to say that we have problems. We obviously have problems, but I wonder you know, like, could we be defining this? Could we set higher goals for ourselves? That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
I really appreciate these perspectives. I think they're really important. I'm gonna argue for a both and, not a either or. We absolutely need to continue to search the world for great minds that will strengthen our intellectual community and our faculty. Our students deserve that, especially as we prepare them to be global citizens. I am fully in agreement with you. You know, the nativism stuff, I definitely don't want to play into that. Let me just say, though, as I said earlier, there are lots of institutions that will point to the diversity in their faculty just by, you know, people who represent other countries, right? And people who come from other countries. And I'm like, yo, but do you have like anybody from Los Angeles though? Like a Mexican-American person from LA on your faculty? That is important too, right? It's both and. And I just see too many institutions that just like try to check the diversity box by having, you know, professors from other countries. So I completely agree with you that we need to continue to work harder, not only to get more faculty from other countries, but also to better understand who they are and track them demographically and so on. But we also need some people from Compton teaching here at USC who have PhDs, and people from the rural South. I'm from South Georgia. We need people like that here too. I think both and.
Thank you. This has been really helpful so far, and I just wanted to share two observations that I've experienced. This is my fourth job. I've been on many, many search committees and done a lot of retention work too. In my area, which is arts and humanities, we have a tendency to designate positions by race and ethnicity, right? So if you're looking for somebody who does Latino, or Chicano, you know, media studies, then you look in that field. I would just suggest that there's sometimes great opportunities to hire in a generalist position a person of color, and sometimes it just doesn't occur to hiring committees. The other thing I just want to point out as an observation is one of my departments, well, multiple departments that I'm in, two of them at least, are incredibly diverse, but there's a tendency to think if you have an African-American colleague, and there's small faculties of 14, you don't necessarily look to add a second one.
Oh,
and
yes,
in one
God.
of the, you know, and I've actually, in our outrageous comments, I was sharing that we've had people say, well, look, you know, we have an African-Americanist here, right? As if all African-Americans would teach the same thing, right? Or do the same kind of research. Actually, in one of my departments in cinema media studies, we actually have 3 African-American faculty members out of 14, and we were pursuing aggressively a fourth precisely because we knew this would build the absolute strongest program in the country, right? So to also remind colleagues that sometimes having multiple underrepresented people, even from the same category, rather than trying to make sure that you're checking off one of each of the boxes of so-called diversity, can actually build such a strength in a program that you immediately become nationally recognized for it.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing those. Here?
Hello, Maurice Hudson, School of Social Work. I just wanted to quickly say 3 things that I noticed. One is when we're talking about terminal degrees, I know that I'm sitting at the table with someone I presume has an MD, I have a JD, but we often focus almost exclusively on PhDs, and so I think that can influence how we see the world in terms of the academy. My second thing was I'm curious about whether we're disseminating that information that we're gleaning, whether informally or formally, from the exit interviews, because it's of great concern to me that someone not only doesn't feel safe in reporting what actually occurred while she was here at USC, but also that that information might not be making its way to the people who need to know it. And then my final thing was just the political climate. I think there's an underlying concern in the electorate about the demographic shift, both politically and otherwise. So I'm wondering about the underlying extent to which people who feel that faculty tenure issues have traditionally been a white space are concerned about the irrevocable loss of that as the demographics shift, and if we need to address that explicitly.
Yeah, no, those are 3 really compelling points. In the interest of time, I will only speak to the second one, and it's about exit interviews. I am embarrassed to say to you that for the first time in my career, I have lost a member of my team. There was a person who left us a month ago to take a job somewhere else. That's never happened to me before. So it did make me wonder, like, well, I didn't have to wonder actually what was up. But she did an exit interview, and I asked the people with whom she did the exit interview if they could, give me some insights so that I can obviously ensure that this doesn't happen to us again. We have a reputation to uphold. And the person who conducted the exit interview said that she didn't say anything, right? But I know why she left. I know very clearly, right? But I think it speaks to your point that, it speaks to both of our points. My point is that people are not always, they don't feel safe in exit interviews, and they're not as forthcoming as we want them to be in ways that would be helpful. But also what you're saying, even when they are, right? Like, how does the information then get conveyed to the dean or the department chair or whomever? I think that that's an important question. It's an important opportunity for us to make better use of the information that's given to us. Great.
Since I have the mic. Leanna Golubchik from engineering. I'm also the director of the Women in Science and Engineering program, and I wanted to ask for advice, actually. So my sense is that a lot of the times when WISE runs events like, on climate and recruiting, or offers funding to departments to do something like the lecture series you mentioned, or other things to diversify the pool, my sense is that a lot of the times, not always, but a lot, we're kind of preaching to the choir. And I also believe that there's a much broader set of faculty that would really think about this if we could reach them. Do you have any advice on how to reach them?
I do, actually, and I think I can convey this succinctly. The best way to do it is to, so I'm running out of words, I've been talking for like 2 hours, but like tuck it in to other occasions where faculty are going to be together. So tuck it in is like not a great, you don't know what that means. Let me say what I mean by that. It's hard to get faculty colleagues to come to, say, a forum or a training, right? Unless you make it mandatory. That clearly works. But sometimes then people show up in those spaces resistant. That is not what's happened here. You all have been remarkably open. I really appreciate you and your openness. Let me get to the point. the point is, people tend to not elect to come to those things, right? So one strategy that we employ in our center is that there is a culture of people going to their academic program faculty meeting or their department faculty meeting. There's a serious culture around that. And you could almost always like account for like individuals, like why they aren't there. Oh, it's because Larry's in New York City giving a talk. That's why he's not at the meeting today. Like it's usually that good. So some people will appreciate this in this room and others won't. Could it be that much of the stuff that's on the agenda, like we could have like done over email anyway, or right? But we could use that faculty meeting time as an opportunity for professional learning or for collective strategizing. Faculty meetings are hardly ever used as strategy sessions because it's like, you know, like work, like checklist work. Like we got to get through these things, these bureaucratic things. I think that's a real missed opportunity for people who do the work of teaching and learning to not like use the space where we're together for that. There are also these signature events. Last year at the University of Virginia, I facilitated a 4-hour thing for the engineering. Okay, I'm getting tired. I'm like saying things like thing. A 4-hour professional learning opportunity for every engineering faculty member. Every single person was there. And it's because they have this tradition of doing a back to school sort of pre-fall semester day-long thing where the engineering faculty gets together. And usually they work on like tasks and assign people to committees. But this time they decided we're going to use those 4 hours to do some strategy and some professional learning. So I think that that's a way to, you know, like do these things in spaces where people are already going to be. Okay, so I'm the only thing that stands between you and lunch at this point. Is someone holding a microphone? Oh, the mic runners. Hey, yay, please give a hand to the people who are running the mics. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you to Michael for having me do this. I love this university. I really do. I just want it to be more diverse and inclusive. All right. Thanks.
Thank you, Sean.